Hi, I'm John the Mouse. In this video, we're going to talk about running against your competition in the transportation business. This is some of the stuff I go over in detail at John the Mouse University. With better information, you can make better decisions, not only on your transportation business, but on your own personal transportation. So let's roll into it. There has always been competition. It doesn't matter which transportation company you're going to start, you're going to have competition. Even if you're the only one in the area, others will want to compete against you. We'll start out with a little story about history of competition of trucking. The roads were rough. A lot of times they were muddy and potholes everywhere. Very few paved roads across the country. Drivers that had the skill and the best horses and the toughest wagons to hold up to the rough roads made the most. It wasn't long and the loads got heavier, and they needed more horses to pull the wagon. Probably where the term started. You need more horsepower. Then they started hooking up multiple wagons to pull more loads to bring a higher profit margin to the owner. As the roads got better, less skill was needed to drive down the road as better trucks came along. Then it became who could drive longer and faster to get them loads done. Then the competition was who could get a bigger trailer to haul more. 20-footer headed to a 40-footer, then a 48-footer. Now we have 53-foot trailers. Then you have people pulling 2 trailers, then 3 trailers. During that time, you also had a weight competition going on. Who could haul more weight? And each time the government steps in to put a limit on it. Now we will talk about your competition in the transportation industry. When you boil it down, globalization is your competition. I know for some, it might be a shock to learn this. Let me try to explain this. Globalization is the increased flow across international boundaries, like ideas, goods, services, capital, and people. Wealthier nations can import labor or outsource to these low-skill workers with a lower cost of living. Your competition has no debt or obligations to compete against you. Increased competition always brings prices down, including wages, and this will be no different. But for the imported worker, it will be the most they've ever made in their life for doing the same work. Let's look at some outsourced labor provided by the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. Now, under this agreement, you have Canadians and Mexican trucking companies being able to operate in the United States. Not only does this affect truck driving jobs and loads, it also affects warehouse jobs. Let me give you a couple different examples I've experienced over the years. I used to work with a company that had a deal worked out with a Canadian company out of British Columbia that would come across the border and get our trailers and take them into Canada. They would pick them up at the border, cross the border, get them loaded, and then bring them back across the border to drop off for us. So then we could run the load to the caves in Missouri. Now that British Columbia company from Canada can run it straight to Missouri now. There are a couple places in the Midwest that I would haul meat down to Laredo, Texas, to a bonded warehouse that would hold the meat for export into Mexico. From what I could tell, they had drivers that came from Mexico with trailers, got them loaded with the meat to take them back across the border. where another driver would take the loaded trailer into the heart of Mexico. But now, that same driver could pick it up in the United States and take it all the way into Mexico, bypassing the warehouse completely. I know a lot of people will say, but the USA drivers can do the same thing. Technically, that's true, but they're not going to. This, I think, is the most important part to understand. So we're going to dig deeper into this. This current information is at the end of 2024. In Mexico, the minimum is 248 pesos per 8-hour workday. That is $12.69 in USA dollars per day. Now, let's compare that to the United States minimum wage of $7.25 per hour, or that's $58 in USA money per day. In Canada, non-federal minimum wage is $15 per hour, or $11.13 per hour, or that would be $89.04 in US dollars per day. By law, this is the cheapest labor you can get from each of these countries. Many workers will get more than minimum wage, just so you know. Now, looking at the numbers, what company from what country do you think would make out the best? It would be a company from Mexico. They can offer double the wage to their drivers traveling in the United States and triple the wage going into Canada, and still undercut the competition from the other countries. How many drivers do you think would turn down a chance to double their wage or even triple their wage? So what happens when they're willing to take a lower price to haul all the loads? They end up getting more market share of the loads. That in turn drops the freight rate. The manufacturers love this. They in turn lower their shipping costs so they can make more money on their products. In another section, we talked about fuel is the largest expense. The second largest expense is the driver pay. Now, if you're a company, you are looking for the best driver for the lowest pay so you can compete against the other transportation companies. And if you're a driver, you may be the worst driver looking for the highest pay. What if you're just an employee of a transportation company? I'm afraid to tell you that you're also in competition with foreign workers willing to live on less pay. Time for another story. I met this truck driver a number of years ago. He was from Africa, a nice fella. He worked for a larger trucking company. As we talked about where he was from, about his family, what his future plans were, during the conversation, I expanded my knowledge. I had lots of questions to ask. I will share what I learned from him. The bigger trucking company brought him over here on a 5-year work visa. He found a cheap 1-bedroom apartment close to the company's terminal he was based out of. He was splitting the cost with another driver. He had cheap transportation. He was sending money back for his family every month to live on. And he was trying to save as much as he could. This was the 3rd year on that visa he had. He was so excited for the next 2 years to go by. He couldn't wait to get home to see his family and to start the business with the capital he has been saving. Him and his family were willing to sacrifice for 5 years to save as much as they could to start a business in Africa. Bigger transportation companies inside the United States are bringing outside workers like this gentleman from Africa to get a dedicated, cheaper labor. We have other non-residents from other countries that can apply for a Visa E2 for treaty investors. This visa gives people from an outside country to start a company in the USA. Anyone that is on the treaty list, you can see here that can apply for a E2 visa. So, does this really happen? Well, yes, it does. I have family outside the country that is using this visa program to have access to buy a couple of semi-trucks to start a business inside the USA. He felt like this was a good opportunity to start when other companies are failing. This is a good time to start buying some cheap assets when you come across them. Like I've stressed elsewhere in my course, you gotta keep your operating expenses low. As you probably noticed from what we talked about already, what companies and drivers are doing. To compete with them, you're going to have to be better than them. Big companies pay the best people they can find to do their taxes. They use federal tax credits like the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, available to employers for hiring and employing individuals from certain targeted groups who have faced significant barriers to employment. We will go over some more tax strategies in a different course for your transportation business. When you first start a business, you have to become the maintenance coordinator, load planner, dispatcher, bookkeeper, and accountant. You can always pay people to do it, but it all costs money. That's why I started this course, starting a transportation business, to help educate people on different parts of the business. Freight recessions hit every 4 or 5 years. They are all unique. A lot of times, it will just hit a certain segment of the trucking industry. Most of the time, most can adjust to running different trucking lanes. Unfortunately, some companies don't make it. Owner-operators and company of all sizes this time got hit hard with this trucking recession of 2024. Many expanded during the COVID high-demand shipping environment. Many bought new expensive semi-trucks or overpriced used semi-trucks that go for semi-trailers too. A lot of that was FOMO, the fear of missing out. Now we have owner-operators and companies that cannot compete in this environment of less freight. That becomes cheaper to haul. The law of supply and demand. Owner-operators and companies have no choice but to sell their equipment and leave the industry altogether because they don't have the capital to keep running. During the 2008 recession, I was running a 53-foot refrigerated with a sliding 10-foot spread axle. I was running into the Northwest and back into the Midwest every week. With my setup, I could gross out at 86,000 pounds. I guess that's what you could say. I was part of a specialized group of hauling that could haul a little extra weight than what the others could. Did I end up hauling some cheap freight? You bet I did. I wasn't going to sit and wait around like the others were doing. But then again, like I stress to everyone, keep your operating expenses low. That gave me the opportunity to run a round trip with a little profit margin, even paying myself. But I could always make sure I had plenty of operating capital to work with for bad times. Was that the best move? The other drivers I knew ended up losing a week of work with their sitting for better loads for the month. I didn't lose any time. I didn't compare the gross amounts of settlements. Looking back, it would have been a great information to have. I did get better fuel mileage than all the other drivers I knew at that time, so that helped my bottom line. The next section we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what your transportation business cost of the operation per mile is.